Okay, welcome to the W3C OpenActive Community Group call for the 13th of October. I'd just like to start off with a brief round of introductions. So going around the screen in the order in which people appear to me. Can I start with you, Nathan?
Sure. My name's Nathan Salter. I'm the lead developer at Playfinder and BookTech. Playfinder is an online marketplace, and BookTech is a booking system / venue map.
Thank you, Nathan. Debbie.
Debbie Giordano, part of the applications team at Everyone Active, working with Gladstone and Nick around particular projects such as Manchester Active and Westminster.
Thank you, Debbie. Matthew.
Matthew Davies from Sports, working with We Play Football to implement the OpenActive booking requirements for MCR Active primarily, and with OpenActive more widely for some of our other customers hopefully as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Donald Smith, please.
Hi, Donald Smith from We Play Football. I'm the head of the IT here, heading up the We Plays Football's OpenActive project. And We Play Football provide booking services to GLL for their for their football pitches.
Thanks, Donald. Andy Gordon.
Yeah, Andy Gordon from Gladstone. It's a senior product owner here at Gladstone, working alongside Everyone Active and meeting their requirements with regards to the Manchester integration.
Andrew Marshall, please.
So principal architect at Gladstone. So that involves looking after where we're going as a business, but also account manager for Everyone Active.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Nick. Oh, muted.
That was the wrong button. That was the visual button. Hello, Nick Evans from IMIN, working on the OpenActive standards and in general in the ecosystem.
And finally, Stephen.
Yeah, good afternoon, all. Steve Midfield, Digital Services Manager, GLL.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so in the previous call of the 29th of September, we discussed, sorry, apologies if I'm breaking up here. We seem to have various bad connections. On the call of 29th September, we discussed really requirements and scoping and just making sure that we were clear on requirements. I think we did agree to some consensus there, just resulting in a requirements document that was slightly more refined than previously and added a couple of strictures about communication to the end user and so on and so forth. But by and large, I think that work is complete. And so now we'll actually be getting more into the actual proposal that Nick wrote in consultation with some people who are on this call now. Hopefully this is mostly just fleshing out of details and resolving comments that already exist on the document. However, of course, there is the possibility that we run into some bumps. I'll just start sharing my screen here. So yes, as reviewed previously, the membership proposal's been under development for some time, starting off as a long GitHub issue. Nick has worked this up into a more coherent proposal, which is a fairly complex one. It's about 10 pages of proposal itself, and then there's some quite detailed appendices about technical implementation. So today we'll be looking at the at the proposal itself, probably not getting to details of technical implementation in this call, but we'll see how far we go, really. So is everybody seeing the proposal itself right now as a Google Doc?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Sorry, Tim, just on the link that you sent out the other day, it said October 2021 at the top. This says May to August.
I think that's actually a different document. I think the October document was the revised requirements summary,
Right, okay.
and this is actually the proposal itself.
Okay, sorry, my misunderstanding.
That was completely my misunderstanding as well. They look almost identical. So when I was actually linking in the invitation, I kept on getting confused about which link to send out. So yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, this is the most current version of the proposal itself. So I don't want to really hover too long on the scope or use cases document. Scope and use cases sections, as I think we've more or less covered these. The only point I'd make would be, it might be worth inserting here a note that this is about an optional extension to the specification, just as a header. I take it that there's not any dispute there. We're all talking about something that's not a requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just add that in. Make that an action on myself. So this jumps down to design principles. And sorry, I'm not too sure. We're getting some interference. It might be from you, Stephen. If you could possibly mute. I'm getting quite sort of Dalek-y interference.
Stephen noted in a call we were on earlier that his internet's pretty bad at the moment, so that would be.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. Okay, so the design principles, explicit consent, zero trust-based approach. Brokers are only given access to customer data for customers that have explicitly consented to providing them access, and customers may revoke access at any time from individual brokers. I suspect we don't actually have much of a choice there. I would imagine that this, for legal compliance reasons, it would be unwise to remove this constraint. I'm trying to think of situations where consent wouldn't be the basis for use of the data. And I think in this use case, that would be pretty much impossible. Are there any dissenting views there?
The only cases in which GDPR wouldn't apply to this is if you are a customer that's required to have your information there. So an example of this would be is if you've got a future booking, then you can't remove your customer information if it's required as part of the booking contract as such. Right,
okay. So there actually needs to be a stipulation attached to the revoking access at any time. There'd be you'd have to cancel first and then.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So I think that might be slightly. So there's two things. So there's the bookings that have been made. So this isn't trying to address GDPR specifically, because I guess the GDPR, they're different. The different parts of the data have different classification depending on the and the use case. So so that's legitimate interests. That's the you'd be processing or contract as for use of the data if it's an existing booking. But this is actually talking to something slightly different, because this isn't actually about marketing at all or anything to do with whether it's being used for that purpose. This is just saying that in order to gain access to the customer record for read and write purposes, you need to get explicit consent from the customer. So there's no way to access the customer record as like a global admin. If you like, the brokers don't have that permission unless the customers explicitly given them access to that customer record, and then therefore making bookings against that customer record. Should that be revoked, then they lose access to the customer within the system.
Yeah,
but they of course still have the data that they've got on their own system, because that's separate.
So yeah, sorry, I lost you for just a second there, Nick. So just to make sure I've understood correctly, so the record would legitimately persist in the booking system, but the broker would no longer be able to give access to that booking.
So yeah, so the record would persist in the booking system. It might also persist in the broker. Might persist in the broker because of legitimate interest or contract. reasons. But that's different to providing access to the data within the booking system, if you see what I mean. There's the access to the booking system for read and write access, and then there's the personal data that exists, that might exist because someone's a sub-processor of someone else, or someone's become a data processor through access to the data, that type of thing. This is just about access, not about GDPR, I guess, is what I'm saying. But it supports.
Right,
GDPR.
but you could update information on the broker system with information harvested or retrieved from the booking system. That's countenanced. And then what happens if you revoke access to customer data on the booking system? Oh, sorry, what happens? So it
depends on if there's, it depends on the data sharing agreements that are in place.
Right. Okay.
So if the broker is a sub-processor of the booking system, which seems unlikely way that would be happening, but if that was the case, the broker would need to remove the data. It's probably not the case. They're likely to be joint data processors, in which case the broker doesn't need to. The broker can keep the data as long as the customer is informed.
Right. Okay. Is this worth noting at this point? I mean, this seems like a useful footnote, possibly.
It might be, yeah, potentially for guidance. I potentially suggest that we steer away from legal guidance in the spec, just from a perspective of, well, obviously we're not lawyers, and unless we were to get it checked. And if we were to provide guidance alongside the spec that is of a legal nature, we might also need to make sure that's coming from a lawyer. So it might be easier for us to just not mention GDPR, other than to say that the approach for data access broadly supports it.
Right, but the assumption we're making is that the broker is not acting as a sub-processor. I mean, that's the.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, that would be up to the systems involved to act accordingly, depending on the contract. So all this is saying is that if the customer for some reason says, I don't want to give MCR Active access to my data anymore, then the way the system works is that MCR Active will lose access to the data. That will be honored, and the customer has the ability to do that. But they lose access to the booking system's data. That doesn't necessarily mean the data gets deleted from MCR.
Right, but still the assumption is that the legal contractual arrangements support this design principle. Like
well, I guess they're separate things, so there could be a number of different contractual arrangements that exist. So this is an analogous example would be if you connect to something with Google. Let's say you log in with Google to create an account in, I don't know, anything, a fun widget website that you found on Instagram or something. If you log in with Google, create an account, that account is created with those personal details that you've got from Google through explicit consent. Let's say that you go into Google and later disconnect that account. Mm-hmm. Now that account still exists with your first name, surname, and email address, even though you've disconnected it from Google. And that's just because the way that consent has happened and the privacy policy of the website that you've connected to and all the rest of it. But from the perspective of the OpenID Connect specification, it doesn't necessarily reference GDPR in there or anything like that in there because, you see what I mean? This is the kind of technical underpinning. So
right. Well, but what we end up with then is that in fact it's not an explicit consent. It's not purely an explicit consent approach, as stated here. Then it is explicit consent with other possibilities being admitted. Is that fair?
No, it's explicit consent. Yeah, it's explicit consent. That's what the design is. But the explicit consent isn't a reason to process data. It's not one of the however many there are, 7. I don't think.
Right, but then if we go through to customers may revoke access at any time from individual brokers, that isn't entirely true, right? I mean, it could be the case that data persists despite consent having been revoked.
I suppose it's revoking access rather than forcing the data to be deleted, maybe.
It's sort of revoking the permission of the broker to make bookings on the customer's behalf in the booking system, as opposed to please remove all my data from everywhere, I think is what it is.
Oh, okay, right. So it's okay. Maybe I just haven't been stressing the revoke access aspect enough then. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I think the confusing part in that clause is the customer data part, because I don't think it's actually about customer data.
I suppose it's both. It's customer data and bookings, so you can access the customer record of of whatever they have on there: first name, surname, email address, phone number, address, date of birth. That's the access that gets revoked to access that data.
But per Nathan's point, it's more like brokers are given access to customer account on booking system as opposed to given access to customer data.
Yeah,
makes it more clear, is what Nathan
Agreed.
said.
Agreed. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%.
Customer account.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Huh. Okay. That felt sort of unnecessarily painful, but probably valuable given the stakes. Industry standard security using OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. Any other authentication standards that people are concerned with there?
No.
No. Okay. Utilize the existing booking mechanisms of the OpenActive Open Booking API. Yeah. REST-based minimal API calls leveraging JSON LD. Yeah, I guess REST-based is the way to phrase it. I suppose if you were being quite tight in your definition of REST, this would not necessarily conform, but REST-based seems loose enough. Does that seem?
It should conform to REST. Although we've got interesting feedback if where it doesn't. That'd be good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
The stateless part, it might technically break, but it's about what REST really means rather than how it's defined.
I don't think there's any state in there except for authentication, which might be. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, we don't want to get into Fielding's essay and all that stuff. Probably not.
Okay. So design principles. Anything to add in there as design principles? Did anyone distill anything out from the document itself? Okay, cool. Example user journey. Okay, so I'll be honest, this diagram confused me no end. I think because of the things it didn't have in it rather than the things that it did. I wasn't too sure what this diagram was actually illustrating.
It's a really good question here, actually. Yes, Tim, because this diagram, although it speaks to a particular example user journey that is achievable with the APIs, and one that's likely to be the one that both MCR and Westminster would use, it's not at all the only way that you could do anything. So I suppose it's an interesting question about how to make a document like this accessible by having some example that's there, but then with the booking spec, there's like a clear flow that you need to go through to make a booking. So that's easy to illustrate with diagrams. This isn't really the same. There's no order that you need to necessarily do things in. If you want to add a barcode before or after, or change the entitlement here and there, or make a booking before it's all just whatever you want to do, really. So I don't know. I'm not sure if this diagram has utility in a spec, or whether it's just useful for a discussion. Or we can go through it. We can talk through what each of these things are and how they link to the stuff below. That's helpful. But I agree with you. I don't know in its current form if it's much use.
Yeah, did other people have thoughts on this, actually, before we unpick it at all?
Yeah, I think Nick's correct. It does seem to be specifically geared towards one specific use case, rather than more of a generic kind of booking flow.
Mm-hmm. And is the solution to eliminate the diagram, or is the solution to add more diagrams?
I think maybe just simplify it a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When I was looking at it, there's some assumptions in here. I think like a customer account exists where? Is that with the broker or with the booking system? As a, you know, it's, although the key shows that there are that colored boxes for the broker, the question as to whether the customer account exists is one of where does the customer account exist? So perhaps some clarification around all those bits would help as well.
Okay.
So I think what I'm hearing is that we should both remove detail and add detail, which
generally improve it so it makes sense.
Yeah, we can all agree on that, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's.
So, sorry, Nick. It's Andy from Gladstone. So where does that stand with regards to the integration that we're looking with Manchester? Then is that just a user case in that particular scenario, where there's an assistance of actually using OAuth2 to authenticate?
Oh, I see. So, well, OAuth is part of the proposal here rather than part of the use case. But the use case, I suppose one way of saying it is that this diagram says that you need to check the email address, and then depending on if the email address exists, you create an account or you don't, and then you make sure you assign a barcode or an entitlement to that account after you've done that. It's possible that, for example, in Westminster, although it doesn't seem like this is what they're saying at the moment, but they could, or another, the next use case could decide that, and actually they're not going to check whether the customer account exists. They're just going to ask the customer to log in up front. Maybe they don't associate the barcode or the entitlement straight away. Maybe that's part of a separate process that happens later. It would be the same API endpoints that the booking system would need to support those things, but the order that this implies isn't part of the standard, if you like. It's not like, or part of the proposal. It's not saying you have to do the box on the left before you do the next thing. It's just one way you could build it.
Okay, I agree with that, but is there a common path that needs to be followed from a basic infrastructure from start to finish, and then it could expand from then depending on the specific requirements?
Oh, so you're thinking kind of like an
underlying architecture and the flow, the fundamentals. So just an example, if you took out the OAuth2 or the authentication, how would that work? If that's not it, well, are we saying that there needs to be some form of authentication? If we remove it completely, what do we follow as a model, even if it's a basic element?
Yeah, it's a good point. You're totally right. These are not. Yeah, this diagram implies a lot of stuff that it doesn't say. So yeah, it needs authentication. It needs those boxes to exist. Yeah, maybe a different way of saying it is that the boxes that exist on the diagram are necessary for the minimum use case, but the order of the boxes could probably change, and the boxes might not all be used by every use case. They could be, if there's an example where there isn't a barcode, and another scheme that doesn't have a barcode at all as part of their approach, then the barcode's not necessary for this to work.
Yeah, I don't want to delve into the details of how this is graphically presented too much, but yeah, if we've got sort of essential components and optional components, would it be worth kind of adding that to the legend a bit? We've got, I don't know, some dotted boxes or something like that, or does that just make it overcomplicated?
Well, I suppose there's two things. This is an example user journey, and then I suppose what Andy's maybe saying is that there's kind of the basics, which is separate components that almost
right could be shunted around any which way, right?
Yeah, that maybe we want to lay out somewhere. Maybe isn't a diagram. Maybe it's just a bullet pointed list, which kind of looks like the scoping list. So but yeah, maybe there's value in having each of the things laid out somewhere.
Okay.
I mean, they're actually the headings of this document as well. So each of these, well, not each of these actually, but some of these are headings. So there's probably something there.
Okay, well, how about we just make it an action, actually on me, I'll say, to revisit this diagram in the kind of optional, well, here's the total number of steps, here's a couple of possible combinations way, and see if that clarifies matters, and we can review that later. Does that make sense? I feel like rather than trying to diagram things in our heads. Oh, thanks for recording that, Nick, in the document. So then we've got a large amount of work on the Federation Gateway architecture, which was then all crossed out in favor of Auth0's screen hint equals sign up approach.
That is a very detailed technical discussion we could get into, but just flagging if that there's a lot in that. So if we wanted to get into it, we could, but it might take a bit of time. I'm happy to summarize what that's about.
I think a summary would be useful anyway. Yeah, because it seems like it's a big decision that was taken, and it's not entirely clear why.
Why? Yeah, it's good actually. Possibly could be an action to write this up as a GitHub issue separately, so there's a clear design rationale and it's obvious to what was going on there. So this is a conversation. But basically, this document was bounced around between a few different organizations during its inception, and we actually had a meeting with Gladstone, which was a really good one, where we kind of moved forward a few of the ideas in terms of this particular bit. To keep it really abstract, the problem is that the OpenID Connect specification doesn't have a clean way to create new accounts that's been well adopted yet. So there are two. This what it says here: screen hint equals sign up from Auth0, and there's also a proposal that it's called prompt equals create that someone else has proposed. But there's not obvious broad adoption for either approach yet, and they're still at the proposal stage within the OpenID Connect specification itself. So what we were talking about was, obviously the best thing here is to make use of as many off-the-shelf components as possible. So there's loads of OpenID Connect libraries. We want to make sure this works in a way that's really easy for anyone to just use those libraries and not customize it in a way that creates a lot of complexity, given it's a standard that we're building on. So the two choices here were to either allow for this flow here, the federation flow, which basically means that you have to have the broker does a lot more work, and it creates more complexity overall, but it does mean that the booking system has a slightly marginally simpler time in implementing. I mean, marginally simpler, it turns out, because actually there's a bit of complexity either way, and the standards crucially would support it more cleanly. So in the federation approach, the standards are out of the box. Like, that's just how it works. You can already do this if you log into any website and you see like a login with Google, login with Facebook, login with something else. If there's more than one option, Google, Facebook, something else, it's quite likely they're using federation in the background to make that happen. So that's what this would be leveraging. But the downside of it is that, yeah, it's more complicated overall. Like there's more complexity to the system overall, and so yeah, I think I'm just trying to think what else to say to make it practical. I think the only other practical implication of it is that if you create an account using the proposal as it stands, then the customer has to reset their password to log into the account at a subsequent time. So that's option A. Say option A is you create the account and you have to then reset your password if you want to log into it again. Option B is that you create the account, and if you want to log into it again, you don't need to reset your password because you can just use your broker login to log in. That's the difference between the two practically. So there's a lot of standard stuff around it, but boils down to those two.
But sorry, I might not be understanding this correctly, but is the implication then also that we can't support a multi-seller system?
No, that's a separate problem.
That's a separate problem. Okay.
Yeah, this is only, this implication basically is that the user account that exists, you get like a special token when you create it, so you can use it. But if the user wants to log into it again, they need to reset their password, and we don't have any way of logging them into it without them doing that.
Right. Okay. And how was it arrived at to just remove this as an option? I mean, because I can imagine people wanting to support this option. But is it simply that the complexity becomes too high? So for the purpose of a proposal, okay.
The overall complexity, exactly, and then the implications of how that works across the rest of the spec. It's a whole different use case to kind of, in terms of how the interaction happens, to think about.
Okay, and how much does the current proposal constrain us against adding this as a second approach later?
It doesn't.
Okay, right.
This could be added. Yeah, this could be added.
Okay, so there's scope for a further proposal that would be compatible then. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yes, we've taken the easier route, if you like, and this is a more advanced route that has a benefit. You don't need to reset your password and could be added later.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I feel like I understand this to the level of detail necessary for this discussion. How are other people feeling about this?
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone?
Sorry, Nick, just to confirm then, so the way that we are talking about here, people will have to reset their password on the booking system in order to log in directly to the booking system. Is that what we're saying here? And not that the booking system will say log in using your MCR active account.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the first of those. So you would see a reset. You would see the forgotten password, but you'd have to press the forgotten password button basically, and be informed that you had an account rather than yet. And as you say, if we did take the more complex route here, then yeah, you could have a button on We Play Football that said log in with MCR active. But then, I mean, the other question there is is that even wanted? I mean, how does that work when you've got like hundreds of these options? You'd have a drop down list, choose your login provider or something. It could get a bit excessive for the use case, potentially.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading your expression, Matt.
Sorry, yeah. as far as I was concerned, as soon as Nick said yes, they need to reset their password, I'm on board.
Oh, okay, right, okay, that that addresses your concern. Okay, great, good. Okay, so checking whether a customer account exists. We've got a comment from Wayne on the side here about what rules constitute an existing account? So does it have to be an active membership, or would it be other states of membership? So Nick, your response is, it could be, do they have access to online services in Legend? However, this might also be good to return information about the state of their membership once they've authenticated.
Yeah, so Wayne's point was that within the ledger management system, often there's a number of different states an account can exist in. And I think more broadly, my suggestion here was, if the user can log into the account, they should be able to log in here. I mean, there's a lot of potential complexity behind the scenes. That means they can and can't log in, or they might be a certain status. They might be not permitted to something or other. But if they can log in on one, potentially they should just be able to log in on the other. And then, as this kind of says, if they can log in but they can't actually make a booking because they've got kind of an outstanding debt on their account or something, then that should be kind of noted as part of the mechanisms for doing that, rather than blocking them from logging in altogether.
Right, okay, so this is met by the expansion of the requirements in the last meeting to encompass communication with the end user, I guess. Right, okay. So it might be worth noting in here that we need to have some kind of mechanism for conveying what happens if you can log in but can't make bookings, that intermediate state. It does need to have some sort of representation mechanism.
Yes, that's right. It's covered in the appendix, but I think good idea to have it noted here.
Oh, okay, right, okay, cool. Just add in.
Question for Andy and Andrew. If that user was restricted to making bookings, in the way that I guess they got unpaid sales, or the status in the entry point that wasn't allowed, does MWS or would MWS in this case adhere to those rules?
So when it comes to the point of making booking and proceeding through from the availability to actually making booking, it would actually not allow you to go past that point. So it would actually provide a form of restriction. We just need to check the messaging around that particular area, but it would restrict.
Okay.
I think
we definitely need something to tell them that they can't. But and for availability, would it come back at all?
Availability wise, you would see what you could do. But at the point of booking, you couldn't actually commit at that point, because that endpoint would then say you can't because of whichever restriction it might well be.
Okay.
And the proposals with this outstanding action bit here, Debbie, is that there's a separate call that can be made to the customer account, which gets any restriction, any issues, outstanding actions as kind of any issues on the account. So that allows the broker to kind of, when they log in, clearly flag something somewhere that says you've got outstanding debt or whatever, membership's expired, something, so that it's not a surprise when they make the booking that that's a problem. They would be able to see that as kind of an alert in the broker.
What's the intended journey for those if they have got a problem?
It provide a URL that they can go to resolve the problem.
Might not always be possible. We can provide you a URL to go and pay off your debt, but if it's that we've put a message on your account to block your account because you're abusive to somebody, a colleague or something like that, they can't resolve that themselves. So I think it's just that you need to have some sort of either one solution for everything, regardless of the type of restriction, and that's not going to be a URL because they're not always going to be able to resolve it themselves. So therefore, is that to contact the centre?
Oh,
you've got to break it. You've got to break it down into what type of restriction is it?
Sorry, it's a message plus a URL. I wasn't clear. So it's a text, a bit of text that MCR displays or whatever displays, and then a URL link they could go to. So would those two together cover what you could envisage there as?
Well, I suppose, Nick, it depends. If the debt is actually, let's say in this example, EA orientated, that shouldn't really be processed through the portal. That should be through the income stream from the actual seller themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he's proposing that it's paid through the portal. I think you're suggesting that we pass it off into our world, our website, to an area that it can be paid off. But it's going to have to be a very generic message, I guess, that says you've got a restriction on your account. It could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, and therefore try this, or try that, or try this. How many restriction types are we talking about? I know that we've got a few. I don't know about Legend and how they would handle each type of one of those restrictions, but it kind of almost feels like it may just be better to say there's a restriction, you're going to have to speak to the operator.
So with Legends, I can talk to that. Although Wayne's not here, there's two restriction types which are in there. I think it's 2 or 3 maybe. The main two are debt related, or you're blocked for another reason. I'll check that actually, but yeah, I think that's so they both have specific messages that come straight from the system. So Legend actually provides a message that whatever the blocking reason is, it's like a particular error message.
Certainly, once you're into the booking portal and there was a restriction, the actual restriction that's in place it could potentially be passed through. It could be shown in theory within the UI if it's deemed user facing. Where we've discussed it before with regards to restriction is in the availability feeds, which on an unknown person it's not so much as impossible, it's very complex to show the relevant restriction based on the fact you don't know who the person is. Is it a gender restriction? Is it a subscription restriction? Is it a purchase allowed restriction? When it's very generic. So we've got more control, Debbie, by using MWS to pass the actual restricting text that's being triggered.
Okay, and as long as we're capturing that requirement and we're saying that it's possible, otherwise it's going to have to be some sort of generic messaging, and it's just taking that into account that there needs to be a way of adding generic messaging and what the thoughts of what everybody else will be doing. That's all.
Yeah, I think we're in a better place once we're into the booking portal itself. The restrictions information that you've got at the moment within the data manager is really aimed for the actual feeds themselves, the unknown.
I mean, it's not to be negative or anything, but it's not great in the current Gladstone solution. So why is it going to be? You're going to have to do some work for MWS, I guess, specifically to make it better. Is that what we're saying?
No, what I'm saying is MWS at the moment, when we're into the booking portal, if we encounter a restriction through the make booking endpoint, it will actually give you it will pass through the message, or it could pass through the message.
Yeah, but that message is there's a subscription type restriction.
Yeah, so again, if we wanted to, we could potentially go through the data manager and put some form of translation depending on the type of restriction. Again, could be a generic message that we want to override, so we could have a look at that.
Yeah, I think we need to capture it, Andy, and make sure if we need a method of displaying something informative and useful to the customer, then we've got to build it in.
I've just added in here that's helpful. The appendix does cover this, but there's currently in the proposal there's 2 types of actions potential messages. They've been named at the moment unblock action and resolve action. Maybe better naming could be a thing, but the idea is unblock is there's a block. The unblock action is the action required to unblock the account. So you need to pay your debt or do something that is a kind of critical issue, and that could be signposted in the MCR experience as a critical issue, kind of red warning circle, click here, your account has an issue, click it, and then you see this message and there's a link if the link is provided by the system to resolve the debt, or just you've been blocked completely, contact customer services maybe, could be in that message. And then the resolve action, the idea there was that's a kind of more of a you need to resolve this issue. You should resolve this issue. So instead of it being like an urgent must fix, it's like you need to do the gym induction. You haven't yet completed your online gym induction, or you need to book a gym induction in order to make a gym booking. So that's a kind of a warning sign rather than like an info sign rather than a warning sign. That was the idea. don't know what you guys think of that.
It's whether we could put all the types of restrictions into those two categories or not. That's, I think, what Andy and Andrew need to go away and look at.
Okay, that sounds like an action on Andy and Andrew. Let's see. I will forward around a GitHub issue for discussion of this. Well, to everyone really, but yeah, with an action flagged for Andy and Andrew to take a look at that. Yeah.
Before we scroll down, there was a point a bit further up, sorry, under that one, which was about the number of matching customer accounts can be useful to display, and I'd put a note in there that would concern me. If I'm putting in an email address and there's various accounts with that email address found, I'm not sure that we should just be returning information about all those individuals for them to select somebody.
Is that the section 1, Debbie, you're referring to?
We're scrolling up. Stop there.
I think it's the second comment on your right hand side, Tim. If you see the comment you're on, just scroll down to the comment below on the right that you can see there. That one.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
D is Debbie.
Yeah, no, sorry. It was actually because my Zoom window was covering up the comment, so steering blind. Anyway, sorry. What is
that line confused me because it doesn't tie in with the response that Nick's put, I guess, that it says the number of matching customer accounts can be useful to display specific prompts to the user to help them understand which account to select. That says to me, I'm going to put an email address in, it's going to go off and check the database to find out if I exist. If that email exists, regardless of the number of times, it's going to bring back a list of members and I'm going to select the one. Is that
so that's a really good clarification point. That yes, it does. All it's talking about is just returning the number, not any personal details relating to the member. So that's obviously an unclear sentence.
Please, sorry, yeah.
If it would just return the. Oops. Oh, sorry, Debbie.
Please, yeah. If we can change it, it just worries me a bit that it's written in that way.
So if it was just a number returned, would that be okay from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess so. It's just what use is that number to that individual? What's the point in returning it?
Yeah, so I think the idea of returning the number rather than just that there is matching accounts is because the broker might want to do something different with its messaging. To explain, for example, that there's two accounts, they'll need to decide which one to log in with or something, I don't know.
So I think the point there, Nick, is what you're saying is the response doesn't go directly to the end user in the UI. It goes back to the broker for them to take the next course of action from the UI interface.
That's right.
Oh, that's not clear either, sorry.
No, that's completely good point.
Is this one where it would be useful to have some kind of screen, some kind of wireframe?
Well, it's not. It's kind of what Andy was saying, that it's a API response.
It's down to each broker to a certain extent with regards to how they're going to interpret their UI and their UI interface. It's not a generic UI, is it? It's down to the broker, whoever they employ to do the third party that's providing their UI.
But yeah, sorry, I'm floundering a bit. So yeah, I guess I'm going to re-ask Debbie's question because I didn't understand the response. So you know that somebody's got 3 accounts. What's their next step? How does that get resolved? Or what are the potential paths to resolving that?
Let's take an example. Let's say for MCR Active, you were logged in and 2 accounts come back. It might be that if there's 2 accounts coming back, that the messaging that gets displayed to the customer potentially could be, please ensure that you log. We found that there are 2 matching accounts that you have. Please ensure that you use the password that corresponds to your personal adult account or something. so that you make the correct connection to MCR. Because sometimes people might not realize that they have two accounts with the same email address. And so that might be I don't know. I mean, it depends on the other scenarios around how they want to manage that operationally in the system.
So sorry, just so that I'm understanding this correctly. So it's actually not that they'd have two accounts with MCR active, it's that they'd have two accounts with the provider. So
some booking systems allow you to have multiple accounts with the same email address and different passwords.
Right. Okay. So
That's
this is
So for example, Legend doesn't allow that. So in Legend, you have you have an email address and you have a password, and there's just a one-to-one. Like the email address is unique. My understanding is that in Gladstone, there's ways of configuring Gladstone that allow for multiple.
Surely, isn't this just down to the authentication provider? Whichever account you're authenticated as is the one that you're selecting.
So this happens pre-authentication. So this is this
is actually checking whether the account exists. So can they proceed onwards to actually then activate that account for this? If they're not on there, the next step is then to create a new account.
That's right. This is used to the fork in the user journey, where if they have an account already, then logging into that account might provide enough customer data to continue and complete the journey. If they don't have an account already, then it's likely that we'll need to direct them immediately to enter lots of customer data, and then later create the account using that customer data.
Okay. Right. Okay, that's clear. So yeah, it's kind of a trifurcation. Right.
Sorry, just one thing. Shouldn't it be down to them to say whether they have an account there or not, and not that we test an email address against the booking system and it comes back and says, yep, there's an account here, because that in and of itself is somewhat of a leak of information, for the same reason why when you put your email address into the forgotten password thing, it doesn't say, yeah, we found you and we sent you an email. It says, if you got an account with us, we've sent you an email. If we're coming back and saying, yeah, you got an account or whatever, that's a bit of a leak in and of itself. It should more be that, yes, I have an account, I'll take you to the login page. No, I don't, I'll create it. I suppose then the problem becomes, if they try and create an account with an email address that does already exist in the system, then we got the same problem. So yeah, maybe ignore me in that regard.
Well, you're absolutely right, Matt, in that there is a potential security risk, which I hope is still flagged in the appendix. It was in a previous version of the stock, which is that the ability, this provides the ability, potentially if misused, it could be used for an account enumeration attack, which is the reason that absolutely the OWASP top 10 recommends not to provide any information about whether email address exists or not usually. So that is a potential risk here. We did an analysis as part of this of looking at existing systems, and Gladstone, Everyone Active's existing system does allow account enumeration. Although that is a security risk and it is something to consider, there are other mitigations for it other than preventing this type of functionality. So for example, a web application firewall can be used to ensure that same IP address can't hammer it with lots of different email addresses and things like that. So that was just if it provides some confidence that risk has definitely been considered in the proposal, and there is a potential there are potential other mitigations. The issue with not having this functionality at all is that for the users that are less tech savvy, that don't understand what accounts they do and don't have, it could be a bit more difficult to navigate through the flow without this feature.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that probably the mitigation that you mentioned there wouldn't be applicable in this case, because it's always going to be the broker making this request, and so the IP address is always going to be the same. But I suppose there could be other mitigations, like the increase the time between checks that you could do it or something like that. But yeah, you're right. It's a very small thing, so it's probably not worth worrying.
I will take this as an opportunity to say anyone interested in this question should attend the implementation forum next week then, and we can get into the risk mitigations, because we are at the top of the hour. So I'll just say thank you to everyone for participating. I will circulate, well, the video when it's up, the link to that, and any actions that are outstanding along with the notes. So thank you very much. And yeah, as I say, we can get into the weeds this time next week. Talk to you all later. Bye.
So.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.